record, or we already started recording, right?
All right.
Let's
And
start.
here they come.
Wonderful. Welcome, welcome, everybody. It's so wonderful to be together and to see you today. Thank you so much to those of you who are able to put your cameras on. It's so awesome to see you face to face whenever we have the chance to. If you are in a spot where you're eating lunch or you're not able to put your camera on or you're driving, please do whatever you need to do. But if you are in a space where you are able to be online with us and we can see you, that would be fantastic. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Renee Marshall, and I am the proud administrator of early childhood education at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. And I'm here with my colleagues today to have a conversation about PK3 equity, inclusion, and diversity, and really taking apart this new opportunity that we have with this new credential and this new standard. And we're excited to be here today. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just mention in the chat, if we could please have some introductions, letting us know your name, your title, your affiliation, that would be wonderful. And if we could go ahead and start our slide deck too, that would be great. Excellent. We want to let everybody know that we will try our best to get this webinar up and posted on the Commission website as soon as possible. We're hoping to have the actual video recording up hopefully by end of this week, maybe start of next week at the latest. We also have a really nice amount of resources for everybody, and we anticipate those resources will be posted on the PK3 Credential website at the start of next week. Let's go to the next slide. I see all the introductions happening in the chat right now. That's fantastic. We've got it here on this slide also, reminding everybody, please include your name, your title, your affiliation. And let's go ahead to the next slide. It's great seeing everybody joining us. I also want to give a huge shout out for those of you who joined us this morning for our earlier webinar on math. Thank you so much for coming back today. We really appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you, and especially 2 different time slots within one day is awesome. And hopefully we'll see some of you tomorrow. We have another webinar coming up that we will be posting in the chat and making sure everybody has access to. So just again, my name is Renee Marshall. I'm an administrator here at the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. I am so happy to be here with my colleagues, Cheryl Hickey, who's also an administrator, and Aaron Sullivan, who is an administrator as well. And we've got Dr. Deborah Keeler here. She's a consultant. We've got Dr. Michelle Williams-George, a consultant, and Dr. Rosemary Wren as a consultant as well. And so we are so happy to be together today. Let's go to our next slide, please. So today we are really excited to have this webinar and this time to come together. This is such an imperative topic. Anytime we're talking about the idea of belonging, being together, inclusion, making sure children feel good about the spaces that they're in, that they feel represented, making sure that the teachers we work with and the programs that you help to create and run are truly representing the landscape of California and everybody that lives in this glorious state. And so we're really excited to have the chance to have this conversation today, as I mentioned. I'm also really thrilled to be in this space where equity is at the forefront of so much of the work that we're doing in education right now, and especially at a time when we're also looking at social emotional learning and growth, and just how we can help people be whole. And it really goes along with early childhood education, the concept of holistic learning and the whole child. And so anyways, it's so nice when kind of all these things are coming together. One other thing before I get into the nuts and bolts of what to expect today is we've been working on this webinar. I think we started development, maybe it was towards the end of November, if I remember correctly. And we've had some really robust discussions internally within the commission about equity and about diversity and about inclusion, and most important, about belonging. And it was really fascinating as we were having conversations on this topic and people mentioning how when we're looking at the diversity of the groups that we work with, by all means, we have to think about what we see, but we also have to think about some of the other elements of what makes us unique that might not be seen. And so we had a robust discussion about even like sexual identity or physical ability, or, when we look at like the differences of what makes us California and what makes us people, there's so much richness to it, and such a space that we can be having these conversations. And anyways, We're just so thrilled to come together today. So today, quick overview from me, then we're going to go into a guest speaker, Dr. Terrell Sells. He's coming to us from Pepperdine University, and we are thrilled that he is here today. We are then going to get into unpacking the standard. We're going to talk about a little bit about a crosswalk on the standard and connecting it. Connection is a key piece of this webinar today, and we hope that what we put together will help to connect pieces for everybody. But please know this is the beginning of the conversation. Through the chat, you'll see other times where we're going to be coming together and inviting people to submit questions and all the pieces to make sure that we are hopefully supporting clear communication about this PK3 new credential. Next, we're going to get into submitting new program proposals. We're going to kind of get towards some resources towards the end, and then we will do a quick wrap up. So I'm going to hand it over right now to my colleague, Deborah Keeler, and she is going to introduce our guest speaker. Debbie?
Thank you, Renee. Well, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Sales. Dr. Sales currently works as the Assistant Professor of Teacher Education at Pepperdine University. Dr. Sales works with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing for the state of California, serving on the Education Specialist Teacher Performance Assessment Design Team. In the spring of 2020, Dr. Sales was elected to serve a 3-year term on the Board of Directors for the California Council on Teacher Education and is also the newly appointed editor for CC News. Dr. Sales' research interests, including education, religion, critical pedagogy, critical theory, critical theology, and theology. Let's give a silent round of applause for Dr. Sales.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. Feel really good to be here and to engage with you all. As they're loading up the slide deck, I just want to give you guys a little context as to why I'm here. Basically, I just want to kind of share with you very quickly some of my expertise and insights just regarding the rationale for why the early childhood teacher preparation programs kind of needs to focus in on equity, inclusion, and diversity, and just how the new program standard in PK through 3 EC credential will be affected. So we're refocusing on equity, inclusion, and diversity. And what I want to do is kind of like peel back the curtain. You can go to the next slide and you'll see why I want to peel back the curtain. You see that? I'm peeling back the curtain. So I kind of want to peel back the curtain on the stigma between, like, when we hear diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the things that are going on. What I really want us to see is that we're talking about culture, interests, and emotions, okay? When we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you're looking at the research on DEI, you're looking at whether it's culturally relevant practice, whether it's culture, whether it's interests, whether it's emotions, and how the brain learns and how we intake information. These are the 3 things that we're talking about. And these are the 3 things that we're championing. And these are the 3 things, if we look at every icon that we see on here, every picture that we see, each and every one of us possesses these 3 things here, right? And it impacts how we learn, how we engage in the classroom. And if we can provide our students with opportunities to truly understand their cultural differences and cultural understandings and how they process information, if we can truly tap into the interests of our students, if we can truly understand that emotions play a huge part in how students interpret, take in, and process information, then we can do some very, very, very good work, particularly at this early age. Whether you're talking about anti-bias education, anti-racist education, whether you're talking about culturally responsive teaching, culturally sustaining practices, each of these 3 things are entities, if you will, play a huge role in how we interact with one another and how we engage as professors, as teachers, and then also as students. So let's just re-engage the conversation and just look at the importance of these 3 entities. So we can go to the next slide. So when we're talking about diversity, culture, and the brain, when we're thinking about the brain, right, we're thinking about how the brain interprets information. So we're talking about, if we look at UDL, Universal Design for Learning, we're talking about multiple means of interest, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of access, right? Multiple means of interpretation and representation. We're talking about how our brain determines what's relevant, what's of value, and what's of meaning, right? So when our brain is interpreting those things, it really has a lot to do with our culture. It's a lot, it has a lot. This is what the research is saying, particularly Zaretta Hammond's book. If you haven't read it, or if it's not in your library, please get that. It's basically culturally relevant teaching or culturally relevant pedagogy and the brain, right? And what her premise is and what she's stating is that each and every person has a culture, all right? Whether we want to admit it or not, each and every one of us has a culture. And there's 3 levels of culture. She says that there's shallow culture, or there's surface level culture. That's number 1. There's shallow culture, and then there's deep culture. And where learning occurs is at the deep rooted level. And she uses a wonderful imagery most people use when they're talking about layers. They talk about an iceberg, but she says the iceberg doesn't do it justice, because the iceberg kind of has a bottom and it ends. So she uses the imagery of a tree, right? Like a really old tree with deep roots. And that tree is also connected to other trees. And if you really get underneath the surface and you look at the root level, you'll see that we all have connections at the deep level. And that deep culture helps us understand and process information. It shapes our worldview, it shapes our ethics, it shapes our understanding of right and wrong, good and bad. And these aspects of culture and our worldview truly indicates how we interpret and take in information. So for educators, it would behoove us to understand our students' culture, so that way we can make the meaningful connections at that deep cultural level for meaningful learning to occur. Okay, so if you could click the next slide, or not the next slide, but so we're talking about relevancy, value, and meaning. If you can click again for diversity, right? So with diverse backgrounds brings diverse knowledge bases, and we know this as well, right? So when we are looking at our students and we're looking at all of the social capital that they're bringing in, the cultural competencies that they're bringing in, we're looking about funds of knowledge and all the other things that we're talking about within the research, we are understanding that all of these diverse backgrounds bring into the classroom a wealth of knowledge. And if we as educators do not engage with that wealth of knowledge and see that wealth of knowledge as assets that adds value to the classroom, then we're missing out on very, very, very meaningful learning opportunities and experiences for our students. And then finally, if you click to the next slide, the next one, we just have to understand that culture really is how we make sense of the world, okay? And when we're talking about a diverse classroom, I don't want us to just think about diversity in the realms of ethnicity or race, right? When we're talking about diversity in a classroom, we're talking about diverse learners as well, right? We have our EL learners in class, and they're bringing in assets. I was just doing an Ed TPA seminar this morning, and I was convincing the students, right, that when we are engaging with students, whether it's our students with disabilities or whether it's our students who are English learners, or whether it's just a regular student within the classroom doing their normal thing, we all bring in assets to the class that when we create, whether it's accommodations or modifications or differentiation, that wonderful wealth of knowledge as an educator actually makes the classroom a more equitable place to be, right? And especially because when we're dealing with students, whether it's pre-K or K, all the way through 3rd or even 5th or 6th, sometimes they cannot articulate themselves the needs and desires that they have as learners. But when we have a student who can, or if we have a student who has an IEP or different things like that, where those accommodations have been articulated and we utilize that within the classroom, most times that accommodation for that student also assists other students within the classroom. So we understand this process before, right? So if we're thinking about diversity, and we're thinking about culture, we're thinking about the brain, and we're thinking about all those aspects, we have to understand as educators that these things are essential to running a classroom and ensuring that that classroom is providing students with wonderful learning experiences, and that we as educators are also learning from our students, right? We don't know everything. We're learning from our students, and by us taking in that knowledge of our students and understanding who they are, it actually creates a wonderful learning environment. You can go to the next slide. So along with this, we're thinking about interests and emotions, right? So all of our students have interests, all of them have emotions, all of them have these things that are comprising their brain and all the things that they're going through. And what we want to understand is just basically the authenticity of how an educator recruits students' interests. is directly aligned to their understanding of the brain's affective networks, meaning as pre-K through you guys are like neuroscientists in a sense. You have to understand how the brain is working, right? And with us understanding how the brain works, it makes us into better educators. You can click the next slide. Sorry, my slides are real interactive. I'm used, but that's something that we have to understand, and that's something that you all understand, right? You all understand that the way that our kids' brains are wired and the interests that helps us recruit their interests in order for us to design wonderful learning experiences to tap into those assets and then utilize those within the classroom. So the next thing that I want us to kind of understand is just basically the role of that section of the brain, whether we're looking at the CAST UDL guidelines, and we're looking at the how, the why, and the what of learning. What we're understanding is that this section of the brain regulates emotion, and emotion dictates how we process information, right? Right? All of us, I mean, we're all like sitting down probably at our desk, but let's just say we're driving into work and someone cuts us off, right? Our emotion dictates how we process a lot of the information, right? That we're intaking at that time. And we as educators understand that that's the same within the classroom. So for us as educators, how are we recruiting students' interests, and how are we understanding that their emotions and how we craft and create our lessons and the learning environment within the classroom assists in engaging our students. Now, it can either assist, right, and help us, or it can be a huge deterrent for learning taking place in the classroom. So when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have to take into consideration all of these aspects, and then creating learning activities that are developed from learners' personalized lived experiences and interests help us tap into the learner's emotions, which also assists us in purposely designing culturally and socially relevant learning experiences where learning can actually occur. That is the key. The key is not teaching the information. The key is not presenting the information. The key is for students to actually learn, acquire, and apply that information, right? That is the test of a wonderful educator. It's not that I can just stand up there and espouse information. It's that my students are learning. And through that process of learning, they are becoming. And that's it. They are becoming, right? They are becoming through that process. And so am I as an educator as well. So I want to leave you with a couple of key practices that we can utilize within the classroom that will promote an equitable and culturally responsive classroom. One of the first ones is critical engagement with materials. How are we crafting and using materials that cause our students to critically engage, whether through writing, through reading, through discussion, through speaking, through presentation, right? How are we creating those opportunities for our students? The next is differentiated instruction, which we already know. Another thing is also collaborative and cooperative learning. Those are two separate things, and we know that, right? I don't have to give a whole dissertation on the differences between the two, but providing students with those opportunities. The next is making those real world connections. We're making those real world connections. That goes back to creating those learning activities that are developed from learners' personalized and lived experiences, yeah? And then the next would be value-based assessments. So we understand our students' values. We understand what they hold to be valuable and true and meaningful and relevant. And in order to do that, we can create assessments that's actually assessing students' learning, right? And then the next one is social and emotional safety. We know that, right? I don't have to give a whole dissertation on that as well, but students understanding that they are safe within the classroom, the type of classroom environments that we are creating. All of this funnels into diversity, equity, inclusion. All of this funnels into culture, right? Understanding my students' culture, understanding their interests, and understanding their emotions. Those three things are helping us engage with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then ultimately, culturally sensitive communication. Again, culture, interests, emotions, making sure that we understand the students that we are engaging with. We understand the parents that we are engaging with. in creating that learning environment. And then finally, just like I was just saying, inclusion of family and community wisdom, those funds of knowledge, right? How are we accessing that and providing opportunities for those to be showcased within the classroom? So all in all, I was given 10 minutes to go through this whole thing. And hopefully it was clear and concise. But what I want you to take from this really is understanding that as we engage with focusing on equity, inclusion, and diversity, and as you begin to engage with the new standard and within your programs, is that we're not asking you to do something that you have not already done. You're already doing these things, right? But me as an educator, when I grew, right, in my practice is when I could tell you why I did something and the outcome that it had on my students. My evaluator would come and they'll say, hey, you know, it was Mr. Sales back then. Hey, Mr. Sales, it's doctor now, but hey, Mr. Sales, that was really great when you did X, Y, Z. Why did you do that? And my response was like, you know, I just felt like doing that. That was great. That was probably my cultural competence, but I did not understand why I did it. And when I understand why I did it and the outcome that it had on my students, that's when I grew exponentially in my practice as an educator. So these are things that you guys are already doing and you already know the importance of it. But just by peeling back the curtains of that diversity, equity, inclusion conversation and helping us see that it's talking about culture, right? It's talking about our students' interests. And then it's understanding that emotions play a huge part in how we engage with our students. If we can marry those three concepts together under the umbrella of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then we can truly impact education in a very profound way. So thank you very much for your time. And I truly appreciate you guys having me this morning. The more relevant and valuable the instructional activities are to the learner's personal interests and goals, the more apt they are to sustain interest, which results in actual learning occurring. Thank you very much. You guys have a blessed day.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sales. That was awesome. I think a lot of us are going to want to take a class with you at Pepperdine. And I literally live at Magic Mountain, Dr. Sales. So that if I show up in one of your classes, okay.
My wife loves Lady Di's.
Oh, Lady Di's cookies. I love it.
So we drive over there all the time. So
okay, I'm gonna message you after this. You let me know next time you're in town. I'll take you out. That would be awesome.
All right.
Excellent.
I'm gonna hold you to
so
it.
Much.
Thank you guys.
I just have to reflect on a few things Dr. Sales said very quickly before we head to our next expert, Michelle. The idea of authenticity and how to get to students' interest, I think that's such a good lens for everybody to be thinking about when you're thinking programs and curriculum and all the, you know, the new credential and everything that you're thinking here. Another thing too, and this is, I almost want to like put this on a shirt or something for myself, just a reminder here. Through learning, they are becoming. Through learning, they are becoming. That to me was just so incredibly grounding for the discussion that we're going to have today. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Michelle Williams-George.
Okay, thank you very much. And for the next part of this webinar, the slides up, there we go. We'll be digging into the specifics of Standard 4 as a means of helping you identify where, as Dr. Sales said, where you are already addressing Standard 4 and where it might naturally fit into the program. And because equity, inclusion, and diversity is such a critical area, we felt it necessary and appropriate for it to have its own standard so it can be called out, identified, and acknowledged. However, we didn't want to add on program content, so the expectation is that it's woven through your existing curriculum. You're already doing this. And we'll learn about how that might work in a few minutes with our colleague, Rosemary. But first, let's talk about unpacking Standard 4. So in order to unpack a standard, you need to ask 4 questions in relation to that standard. And by the way, these questions really can relate to any standard you are trying to unpack. I did this work way back when common standards came on board. So it's been around for a while. So the first question is, who is doing the action that the standard requires? And by the way, we'll be going through a couple of examples here. The next question is, what action does the standard require? And then what all does that action encompass? And then finally, how should that action be accomplished? And as I said, we're going to go through a couple of examples. So next slide, please. So we're going to take a look at one component of standard 4. When you're unpacking the standard, you'll ask, who is doing the action? Now, for standard 4, the program is doing the action. Do a click if you would. We're working on animation ballet here.
If you would let me do something quickly, because
Okay.
it's not, hi friends, I'm running the slides. It's not giving me the slide preview that I need to see. Hang on
Okay.
1 second. I apologize for the,
No worries.
with all the webinars we've done, I assume there had to be a blip somewhere. And
Heck,
here it
stuff
is.
happens all the time.
Yep.
So thanks everybody for your patience. I love how everybody's head's just gone, yep.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
know how that goes.
Everybody-
Here we are.
Everybody's
Oh,
space.
excellent. Okay,
Awesome.
I found what I need. Thank you. And I will reshare. There we go. All right. And then we get us back to the slide we're supposed to be on.
Mhm.
Excuse me, Erin, for some reason it's not fitting on mine. Is it fitting okay for everybody else?
Yes,
It's
on
good.
mine it
Great,
is.
great, good.
And we are here.
On 7. Yep.
Yes, great.
Okay. So
Thank
one
you.
more click and the program will be underlined.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Got it.
So again, it is the program that is doing the action. And for standard 4, the program we're doing the action for all of the standard. And what action is required. So in general, for standard 4, the program is preparing candidates to do something, providing opportunities for candidates, or ensuring some knowledge or skill. So in this component, the program is providing candidates with an opportunity. And what does the required action encompass? So this is where you want to ask yourself, or another way to ask the question is, what specific verb, English teacher, what specific verb is the standard asking that the candidates be able to do? So in this case, it's learn and apply. And specifically, learn and apply principles of educational equity. Okay, so, and the last question you'll ask is, how or where should the action be done? And this will be through coursework and clinical practice. So what you'll find is you'll ask these 4 questions of each component of the standard. And Erin, I'm going to have you do one more click. Each component of the standard. And for standard 4, the first and fourth questions are always going to have the same answer. So the program is always doing the action. And again, that's just the case for standard 4. Any other standard you're working with may be something different. And for standard 4, the action will always be through coursework and clinical practice, because we're asking to see where candidates receive the content of the standard. So that's going to be primarily coursework, and then where they're also applying it, which is going to be clinical practice. So kind of 1 and 3 already are answered for you. So this is a continuation of the component of the previous slide. And I've started with this one because it's large and the most complex component of standard 4, because it contains that subtext, which provides some details. So we already know from the previous slide that the program is doing the action. The required action is providing candidates with opportunity, and the action is accomplished through coursework and clinical practice. So the sub-content of this component, so remember, you're going to be looking through this as you're looking at the standard. The sub-content of this component provides more specifics about what the action encompasses, what we want the candidates to be able to do. So what specific verb is the standard asking that candidates be able to do so? Let's take a look at the verbs. A is where the standard is asking that candidates be able to examine personal attitudes in each of these areas. And now note that, as Dr. Sales said, it's not just ethnicity or race. but we're also asking, excuse me, that candidates be able to examine their personal attitudes related to issues of privilege and power connected to age, gender, language, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, ableness, and socioeconomic status. So it goes pretty deep here. So B is asking that candidates be able to analyze, monitor, and address these issues, not only personally, but also at the individual and system level. So one of the things to remember is that if it's called out in the standard as these specific areas are, we're going to want to see that in your responses, because we want to know that you are also deeply going into the standard in these areas. Okay, so we're going to take a look at another component of standard 4 that's a bit more straightforward. So here again, we know the program is doing the action and through coursework in clinical practice. Okay, so let me ask you, in your heads, what is the required action of this component? So it is preparing candidates, not providing opportunities as it was in the previous component. So evidence in this component may be a bit heavier on coursework. Now take a look and identify what you believe the action to encompass. So what specific verb is this standard asking, or this component asking the candidates to be able to do? And that is examine. Specifically examine these particular areas: teaching, learning, engagement, and then family and community involvement. So this component of standard 4 is asking programs to show how or where in coursework and clinical practice the program is preparing candidates to be able to examine each of these areas in order to improve the growth, learning, and development of all children. Now, I'm a little bit over. I did have a pop quiz for you. So what you can do is take that pop quiz yourself when you get our standards. It'll be self-graded, no rubric, so hopefully you'll do well. So what, Erin, if you would, pop over the next slide, there'll be a few clicks with the underline. And now that you have an idea of how to unpack this, unpack standard 4, remember those 4 questions. My colleague Rosemary will talk more about how standard 4 relates to your existing program.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for deconstructing the standard. It really underscores the key points and helps us understand how to explore the standards, not just this one, but all of them. And since we have some new ones in this credential, it'll be really helpful. This standard is not a discrete skill or practice, so programs are going to need to weave it throughout their coursework and clinical practice in order to provide candidates with a lens through which they can view their role as educators of young children, one which they can use when they make decisions about their own choices related to curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment in their learning spaces. The standard's designed to prepare teachers to provide all of California's children with early learning spaces that are inclusive, meaningful, intellectually challenging, and truthful. It's meant to provide future educators with the tools that they need to recognize, address, and navigate issues of race, bias, and access when they occur in learning spaces. As educators incorporate this more thoroughly into and throughout their practices, they're going to be cultivating a crucial sense of belonging for all of California's children to experience in their very first classrooms. They're going to help them see that school is a place for them and that they matter. That's really what is at the root of this tree that Dr. Sales was talking about today. So the intent of this standard is to ensure that candidates are familiar with the theories and principles of educational equity, and that they're provided space and time in which to examine their own attitudes about their relationships with power and privilege, and how that manifests in the classroom. It often does in a way that we don't even notice unless we're looking for it. For some candidates, it's going to be the first time that they've been asked to stop and reflect on this. And for others, they will be well aware of how these issues have impacted their own lives and the consequences. So today we're going to be sharing some examples of how programs might choose to address the standard with the candidates. It is very likely you're already doing things in your program that address some of these topics. And what I'm about to share with you is not prescriptive. These are suggestions, just in case you need to get rolling on the different areas of the standard. And these slides will be available later next week. I'm not going to read everything on every slide. So hang in there with me. And so if we go to the first one, we've broken the standard down. And so the first part is that the program provides each candidate with an opportunity to learn and apply theories and principles of educational equity for purposes of creating and supporting socially just learning environments. And if you recall what Dr. Sales was talking about, critical inquiry, critical thinking. And so all throughout this standard, there's an emphasis on critical inquiry and reflection. And so if you click the little button, yeah, so this is the one I was going to emphasize. And pretty much this suggestion could go across any and all of the courses, but building in time and building a practice of reflective journaling, either on what candidates are observing in their clinical practice or on their own personal understandings of educational equity. And so we can go to the next one. And this is the big one. So I've broken it all down into its elements. So through coursework and clinical practice experience, candidates are going to examine their personal attitudes related to issues of privilege and power in different domains, including age, gender, language, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, ableness, and socioeconomic status. This is a foundational element of the standard. And if you click again, you'll see that I've highlighted the first one is to engage in critical inquiry and reflection in journals and discussions about candidates' own identity and attitudes related to these domains, because it's crucial, because we know in our research and our practice, it shows us that when educators have a strong sense of who they are, they can create space to better understand and serve the children in their learning spaces. And this is, again, this is something a lot of our candidates may not have ventured into yet. So it's good to be able to practice it in the space of the program where they feel safe and they're amongst their peers. And then to learn ways to analyze, monitor, and address these issues at individual and system levels. If you click again, it'll highlight practicing critical conversations about contemporary events and policies. And again, our own personal attitudes and ideas. Again, in the space of the teacher preparation program, where people can ask questions and go through some of those awkward conversations so that when they're in a classroom with young children, with colleagues, that they will be prepared and it won't be so awkward, it won't be so challenging. And then going on to the next slide is through coursework and clinical practice, they'll understand how explicit and implicit racial bias impacts instruction, classroom management, and other early childhood program policies. And again, I mean, this is a tricky one. You know, engaging in critical inquiry and reflection on behavior policy and cultivating developmentally appropriate responses to children's behaviors in both historical and contemporary contexts. There's a lot of research and a lot of chatter about expelling children in preschool. And if we look at some of the research and what it tells us, there are a lot of links to racial patterns of racial bias that are expressed in that. And as early childhood educators, it's possible to address that at the foundational level in these children's first learning spaces. So we can go to the next one. And so on the next one, we talk about developing an understanding of the role of the teacher in creating equitable learning opportunities. And one of the things that I find in pre-service educators is a lot of times trying to understand just what agency they have in advocating for young children. And so giving them an opportunity to role play strategies for engaging brainstorming situations like what keeps me quiet when I see something, and how do I do that in a constructive way? So providing those opportunities. And going on to the next bit here. It provides opportunities to learn how to identify, analyze, and minimize personal bias. And we're not just talking about racial bias here. There are all sorts of ways that when a child walks into the classroom or a parent walks into the classroom, there's a bunch of things that go on in our minds. And so really stopping in the program and making space to have conversations about the importance of holding judgment and creating space for whatever that person might be bringing into the classroom, into the learning space. And again, more critical conversations here. We can go to the next slide. Preparing candidates to improve growth, development, and learning for all children by examining teaching, learning, children's engagement, family and community involvement, and other supports for learning and access for all young children. And one of the things I am learning more about early childhood, my background is in elementary education. And one of the most wonderful elements of early childhood education is how it embraces the community. And we're looking here at the whole child, and we're going to be introducing these practices into some new spaces. And so one of the most important things for our educators to do is to know the community where their children are coming from. So being part of events and community practices that are going on to really, and building that into your program. And I've seen it in some programs, and it's really a fun thing for the candidates and for the community. And then I think we have one last one. And this is to, again, emphasize that assets-based pedagogy that Dr. Sales was speaking of. And when we see a child walk into our space, rather than say, what do I need to do to fix that child, but more, what is that child bringing in and how can I build off it? And one of an easy way to do this without adding to a curriculum or a course is, as a faculty member is facilitating a course, to explain the choices that they've made pedagogically and curricular wise. And then finally, words of wisdom from a mentor of mine is listen to children. And if we're centering our choices and talking about how choices are centered on children in the classroom, that's assets-based pedagogy. So and we're rushing through this. I'm happy to address this more if you have more questions. The next page, the next slide shows you a little map of how you might fit or work the standards into different elements of your program. Because it doesn't have its own teacher performance expectation. So we've created a map where on the left side is the language of the standard. In the center are some of the TPEs that might apply to that standard. And in the right-hand column, again, more suggestions or examples of possible connections and activities that you can incorporate into your program. So all of these will be available when we post the information later this week. And thank you all for being here and for making time today. So I'll hand it off to Cheryl and Erin.
All right, everyone. Well, that's a lot about content. It's a lot about the importance of this standard. It's a lot about how to unpack it, how to find your action verbs, how to really break it down, and how to see it reflected in the TPEs, because this particular standard, Rosemary said, and I just would emphasize that it doesn't have its own set of TPEs, which most of our standards typically do. So really like that that little breakdown slide that Rosemary shared, which is a good suggestion of, sort of how to see it throughout your program, throughout your candidates' opportunities to practice. So briefly, and I mean briefly, I just want to talk a little bit about, or give you an overview of the process that programs will go through in order to in order to get a new PK3 ECE credential program approved. We are having a 2-hour webinar tomorrow just to talk about this process. So we will have an opportunity to go in depth. We will walk through the evidence pieces that we're asking for, etc. But so just to give you an overview in case you're new to this, In order for an institution to submit a program proposal for the new PK3 ECE credential, the institution must first be a commission-approved institutions. So only institutions that have been through initial institutional approval, and if you're at a CSU or a UC, you've been operating for a very long time, many private post-secondary institutions. So if your institution offers other educator preparation programs that have been approved by the commission, it is a commission-approved institution. So if you are an institution then that wishes to offer this new PK3 credential, we have developed and will be sharing with you tomorrow, and it will be loaded on our beautiful PK3 ECE credential webpage, which is just loaded with resources, by the way, and we provide some links for that at the end here for you. But we have developed an evidence submission guidance document. So the way that program proposals work with the commission is we have determined specific elements of evidence that will help reviewers see the alignment of your proposed program to these standards. There will be a course matrix included, which is typical of any of our standards that have candidate competencies, TPEs. And then there's additional evidence. Again, we'll walk through it with you tomorrow. Hopefully most of these pieces are evidence are authentic pieces of evidence that you already have in the operation of any program, candidate handbooks, course syllabi, org charts, things like that. But again, we'll go deep tomorrow. But we do ask for some specified pieces of evidence. When those program submissions come in, we will be assigning them to groups of peer review teams. So we have individuals with both multiple subject and ECE experience who will be working together to review these program submissions and determine whether or not they see clear alignment to the standards, or if they have some questions, or there's some things that they're just not quite seeing. If there is anywhere where they're not sure of the alignment or they're not seeing a piece of evidence, they will create a feedback document. It will come back to you. You'll have a chance to respond. And in that way, this is an iterative process. It's not one and done. It's not as if you submit it and it's wrong, we say no and don't come back again. We don't want that. We're as excited about this new credential as you are. So you will have an opportunity to work and go back and forth with your reviewers, with some support from commission staff if needed, until we get good alignment for your program. Once your program has been determined to be fully aligned, it has to go to our committee of accreditation for final approval. Once the committee grants final approval, then you're off and running. You get to go, you get to enroll, you get to admit, you get to start your coursework, and you get to move forward with this credential. Now, something about this particular credential that's really key is that we really have been trying to move this forward as quickly as possible. And in this particular case, what that means is we're actually moving a regulatory package at the same time that we're getting ready to open the program proposal process. And what that means for you all, and I think this is the most important piece, is that we can't allow you to start operating a program until the regulations are passed and approved. And part of that is, frankly, a benefit to you. If we approved a program and said, yes, go and operate, and then the Office of Administrative Law, who are the attorneys at the state level who have to approve our regulations, if they came back and said, there are some key pieces in here that we don't like or need to be changed or whatever, it would cause a real hiccup with your programs, potentially. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want you pulling people back or, doing all of this work only to have to sort of stop and start again. So we will review your program proposals. We will continue to get them toward, full alignment. But if our regs package hasn't passed yet, we are not going to put the programs before the COA. So we will hold them. I hope that we will even be able to let you know your program is aligned. As soon as the regs package passes, we will put them forward to the COA. But that's an important key piece for you all to know. And I will just say, as you can imagine, with state level attorneys, we have very little power to move them any more quickly than they want to move. But we are very responsive if they do have questions, because as I said, we want to keep this moving as quickly as possible. So please, If you can attend the webinar tomorrow from 9 to 11, great. I think if you're planning to submit a proposal in the next 30 days, it's a must. If you are thinking that maybe you won't submit until next fall or even next spring, I would encourage you to come if you have the time, and just listen and start to think about what's going to be asked of you, and do you have that, and what do you need to create. If you cannot attend, whether you're planning to submit, this year or next year, we will be recording that, of course. So you will have an opportunity to go back and listen to that webinar after the fact. And of course, we have staff that are ready to walk through that with you. Pardon me. Just wanted to give you a little example of kind of what our evidence guide will look like. And again, it's just a taste. It's just a taste. But one of the things that we do, again, as we look at the standards is to, determine what it is you can provide for us. Is it going to be a piece of evidence, or is it going to be some short narrative? If you're used to doing our regular year 5 program review process, you know that we really limit narrative. But in the case of, I think, this particular standard, as well as the literacy standard, there are some places where we just need to have narrative. We have not yet been able to determine if there is a 1 or 2 or 3 solid pieces of evidence that we can ask for. So we're going to ask for some narrative. And so you'll see places where we'll say, 250 words or 500 words or less, hit these key points for us. So even within something as open-ended as narrative, we will try to be very clear with you what it is that we think we need you to respond to in order for reviewers to see alignment to the standard. So even where we're open, we're still a regulatory agency. We still put guardrails on everything, or I don't know if guardrails is the right thing. Maybe put things in boxes. But it is it is an effort on our end to try to keep things clear and concise, and focused for you and also for the reviewers, so that we can keep this iterative process really as short as possible for you all. And with that, I will turn this over to Debbie.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
So we wanted you to be aware of the California Department of Education equity resources that are on their website. And there is a link in this presentation to that actual webpage where they address some goals in relationship to equity in education, characteristics of quality schools, some tools for professional development, particularly on the topic of social justice, information innovation practices in California, and then recent research on related topics that are currently available. Next slide, please. Recognizing that this is an ECE credential, PK through 3rd grade, we wanted you to be aware of some of the ECE resources at the state level and also across the US, specifically the CPAN, which stands for California Preschool Instruction Network. And you'll find professional learning opportunities on there, and they do address this particular topic with those PLC opportunities. Our learning foundations, although they are under revision, they are in existence and do address issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And then the California Department of Education has inclusive early education resources, understanding the needs of young children, and with those inclusive practices. And also the California Early Childhood Online, where you can take specific courses in relationship to this topic and gaining a deeper understanding of young children and how these issues can be addressed. And the National Association for the Education of Young Children has a diversity, equity, and cultural competence statement on their website. We also, with the commission, are a part of the EEIC grant, and they have recently had a community of practice session on equity, inclusion, and diversity. And so we are providing the link to that recording. And there are also other additional resources that are available. So I'm going to hand it off to Renee to close this webinar out.
Thank you so much, Debbie. And I hope everybody has been seeing, I've been putting this into the chat for a while now. We have quite a few resources that we want to make sure that people are aware of. And we hope to also see you tomorrow at the webinar. I know we've said that a couple times, but we want to make sure everybody knows to definitely subscribe to the ECE news, definitely subscribe to the PSD news if you haven't had a chance to subscribe to those yet. If you have any questions that you would like submitted, please make sure that you can submit them on the form. We've been putting that in the chat. We also welcome you to send any questions or any comments or suggestions to the ECE mailbox. We have that listed here. We have ECE office hours coming up the first Tuesdays of the month and the third Tuesdays of the month from 12 to 1. And those are clicks to get into those Zooms. We also have our very first ECE community circle that is starting on Monday, February 6th. So we're hoping that you will have a chance to join us that day from 11 o'clock until 12:30. And that's like a pop-in, just so everybody knows. The community circles are going to be very similar to like a community of practice, where it's just about discussion and whatever people want to talk about that day. So we're excited to bring that space and to see how that works out. I'm looking forward to it. It should be great. Let's go ahead to our next slide. Great. And on here, we have a listing of some of our past webinars that may be of interest to you. All of these are listed on the PK3 ECE website, which is linked on this slide. And we've been putting that website up within the chat quite a bit too, so you can get that direct link. If you haven't had a chance to go to that website, please do so as soon as you can. We are trying to put as much information and resources up on that website as quickly as possible. Please know that. And please share that with anybody you know as well. Also, just another reminder that we have the upcoming webinar tomorrow on PK3 program proposal process. We hope you join us. The webinar will be from 9 to 11. We absolutely will be recording. And so, but if you can join us for any portion of the time, we would love to see you. We are really focusing on trying to have clear, consistent communication with the PK3 credential. We invite you to engage us in discussion or invite us into your spaces. We really are hoping to be a resource as much as possible through this process. And the truth of the matter is we are all doing this together. Just earlier today, I know just right away I was looking and I was like, who's been here earlier today? And like Pamela, Melinda, there's so many, Helen, Jan, Guadalupe, Annie, there's so many people who are on right now that were on the webinar earlier today. And I just want to thank you for your expertise and I'm feeling almost like, do you remember Romper Room when she would have that cute little marriage? You'd be waiting for your name. If you were on earlier and I didn't say your name, I apologize, but thank you so much for your expertise. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your willingness to communicate and to have these discussions and to ask these questions. I also really love to see the rich variety of people that are attending. That is one of the most just inspirational things where you're seeing where everybody's coming from. And as we're talking about this standard on equity and inclusion and diversity and belongingness, it just feels so right that we were all together today as we're having this discussion. So let's keep talking, everybody. Really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. Wanted to let you know that we have this slide of resources listed two different ways. We know sometimes when we have like the cool link where we just put PK3 handbook and we link it there, sometimes people have issues getting that. So we actually put the long links in here as well. So if people need those, they will be easily accessible. So we will have this webinar recording up as soon as we possibly can on the PK3 website that we have posted. We will get these resources and the slide deck as soon as possible. We're hoping to have those posted towards the start of next week. But we invite you to the webinar tomorrow. I hope I get to see you at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, Friday, February 3rd. I can't believe we're already in February. And then hopefully you will have the chance to drop into our community circle on Monday, because that's going to be what we all create it to be. So, and also I want to just let everybody know that I was looking in chat and I saw people's comments to Dr. Sales, and it seems like he might be somebody that maybe we can engage in some more conversation with, because it sounded like that was of interest to those who are on today. So let's just end with his thought that he shared with us. And I'm going to go look right back at my paper because I want to make sure I say it right. Through learning, they are becoming. And honestly, through learning, we are becoming. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful evening. And we will see you bright and early tomorrow morning, hopefully at 9 a.m. So take care, everybody. Have a great day. And good afternoon from the team at CTC. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us today. We appreciate you. Take care. if we could please